Good morning. Let's go ahead and get started. I know a couple folks are still getting in, but nice to see you all. And here we are in our second meeting of the year. Feels like since I saw you last, I'm kind of caught in the Bill Murray movie of Groundhog Day with about 10-degree weather and -5-degree wind chills. But nevertheless, some reasons to be optimistic. Days are getting longer. Spring training starting soon. And most importantly, for anybody who's been looking at the forecast, both I think today and tomorrow are supposed to be in the 40s. So let's hope that we get back some of our streets and our sidewalks and it's easier to get around. So a couple things. Let's start off before getting into our reports by approving our minutes from January. I know there was a lot of discussion, a lot of speakers between our board members and myself and Kate and others. Are there any questions or discussion related to January that anybody would like to bring up? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes? Thank you, Tim. Can I have a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. Any against or abstentions? Okay, I'll let the minutes reflect that we have approved January. Okay, so I'm going to just be pretty quick here in the chair's report and just reiterate a couple things that I discussed, brought up last month. So when we talked about some of the priorities, one being CMRI and specifically the Commercial Vacancy Working Group, wanted to chat a little bit about that. So we are, I think, as I'd mentioned, we're in the process of revamping that group. I'd call it more of an addendum to what was done back in 23 and 24 than a full overhaul. Right? It's kind of building upon some of those successes and hoping to continue to adapt for the challenges that the county and greater economy are facing. So that is coming together. You'll be hearing more about that in the coming meetings. One other thing that I would bring up with that is this group is, we're going to be pretty clear on timeframe. So we'll be accountable to you all as far as, when we plan to come back with recommendations, which I would expect would be at some point, this summer where we'd be talking about certain ideas. So stay tuned on that. And then related to CMRI, I wanted to share a virtual meeting I sat in on last week that I think is really relevant for some of what we're going to talk about today. So specifically, last Wednesday, there was a site plan review meeting for a interesting project in Roslyn, 1901 North Moore. Many people know it or formerly known as the RCA office building, which I'd been in a handful of times in my career, but I did a little bit of research on it. It was an office building, 12-story office building built in 1970. Amazing views, very antiquated, the columns everywhere, not good HVAC, et cetera. It's just obviously an older building with really no demand for it. Jefferson Apartment Group is getting, I think, pretty close to finishing their construction of a 2-tower, I think it's 27-story residential building. It's about 425 units with ground floor retail. So it'll be a great development for Arlington and for Roslyn. But specifically what the site plan review is about, or the site plan amendment, is they are attempting to convert on a temporary basis, probably somewhere between 3 and 5 years, about a quarter of the units to more of like a hotel or an extended stay use, which I found to be really interesting. They are partnering with a pretty well-known local group called Placemaker. They actually have, I believe, some units right over here at the Rixey with Marymount. And it was a really, I just want to share a couple of my observations that I have from it. I found in particular, there was a lot of really good discussion, but for the most part, everybody that I saw who spoke even if they had issues with the project, they were ready to compromise, and they were ready to talk about different solutions and how to press forward. So there was some pushback, for example, for things like traffic flow, drop-offs for food, groceries, et cetera, the things that we're, always dealing with. And then there was certain concern and talk about how long would this be? Is it 5 years? Is it 3 years? Questions about the unit mix, which generally seem to range between 1 and 2 bedroom units. But overall, I found it really refreshing to see developer, the county, the Civic Association and others. It was an open meeting, and this operator working real time to solve issues that we're all facing. But along with that, just to wrap up this thought, something that really struck me as interesting was there was a comment, or there was a question as to why are we doing this? We understand that, providing these, more hotel rooms and extended stay units could be beneficial for visitors and family members and friends of folks that live in the area. But there was a comment about the anticipated lease up of those 425 apartment units being slower, anticipated to being slower than they originally thought, which led me back to our discussions that we talked about adaptive reuse. And with adaptive reuse, it encourages developers to build different types of units, right? If you're dealing with an existing building envelope, there are certain restraints that you will have as opposed to going ground up and building a 25-story glass tower. So what we've seen with a lot of our early applicants, I believe, and please correct me if I'm off here, but a different unit mix, right? So larger units, different depths, different view corridors, different types of products. So, I think here, one of my goals as discussed is helping bring more supply of housing and other product to the market. But not only do we want to help the business business community bring more actual units in supply, but a diversity in supply. So it's not just all studios and 1 bedrooms, but a wide range of types of units. So again, I just want to share those observations. I found it to be a very encouraging meeting, really creative. And, there are a lot of areas where I work in where we'd never see a meeting like that. So I took away, a lot of positives, that we have so many smart and thoughtful folks that are doing business in this community. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kate for the director's report.
Thanks, Nick. Well, that's a good segue because wanted to share a couple of things in terms of development activity. You all may have seen in the news that there is a developer ready to kind of start moving forward on what's known as the Potomac Overlook site, which is in Roslyn. It's the former Keybridge Marriott site. So I think in the spirit of what Nick just described, I think there's a lot of interest in making this project something where there is thoughtful discussion, working together towards something great. So we're excited that that's on the horizon because it represents a significant opportunity, not only for what could happen from a development standpoint, but that's a gateway location. It's a signature site. So we want it to be all that it can be. So that's coming down the pike. Another thing to make you aware of is we are in budget season and the county manager's budget is coming forward on February 21st. That will be followed by a series of work sessions where each department and division of the county talks with the county board and kind of presents, their take. You won't be surprised. This is a budget that is very lean. And there's going to be a lot of discussion about that and just kind of the trade-offs of how do we keep doing the work we do given constrained resources. But be on the lookout for that. And I think EDC will end up putting forward probably a statement and then potentially at the April board meeting actually being in person to potentially testify. So that's on the horizon. Another highlight, you guys have it in your upcoming events, but if you recall the placemaking grants that were awarded, I think last cycle, and I think Nick, you were actually on the panel for these grants or you participated in some way, but this is a new pilot grant program that was released just this year. And what's exciting about this is a pop-up art space in the old Walgreens building that is right there at the corner of 66 and Langston Boulevard. So the grand opening, it looks like is, next weekend or the weekend after. And this is a short-term adaptive reuse of a space. So I encourage all of you to check it out. I think this is the best of what we can do in terms of temporary placemaking. So that's coming up. Building further on what Nick has brought to our attention, though, just in terms of, what's happening in the market. If we go to the next slide, since I've stepped in to the interim director role, one of the things that I keep hearing from folks is, how is attraction going? How are we doing on business attraction? And I'm not going to lie, it's different. And I would say that we are not seeing the demand that we saw pre-COVID. We really have not returned. And what some of these numbers are just, showing you is that the demand that's out there, back in the day, pre-COVID, we would see large kind of footprints for businesses. And that's what the total square footage and square footage per kind of success. A success is a project for us. That number has really come down. And then the total square footage has also come down. So the first line you're looking at is July of 2017 to March 2020, and then July 2024 to 2026. So the last 2 years, you can see the decline in overall demand. And this is not just an issue for us. This is happening kind of almost statewide. I get BEDP's regular reports that say, what are the deals that they're doing? And the knowledge work is such a small component. It's like at the bottom of the list right now. So that is what we were up against in terms of sort of macro dynamics. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind, because I think what that suggests is, what our team can do is we can't necessarily change those macro dynamics, but we can make sure that what we are doing reflects that and is prioritizing what we can to deal with what is that second bullet, which is we still have an oversupply of office. So today we're going to talk about CMRI because that's a big part of the solution for that. But I just wanted to share some of these stats because I think the numbers do tell quite a story.
Hey,
Yes.
just a quick question,
Yeah.
and this may be self-evident to the rest of the room. The time frame in between April 2020 and June 2024, was that so depressing you didn't even want to display it?
It's gone bad. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's part of the reason the stats didn't get
All right,
there.
thanks.
Can I ask that
Yeah.
question? Sorry, probably naive, but it seems to me that although this is just talking about square footage, I understand that impacts our tax base.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean we're not attracting businesses, because
Correct.
businesses may be coming at just having their footprint a little bit.
Much smaller. That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Right.
but it still is impactful to our economy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that.
Just want to add a little
No,
negative onto.
that's great context. I think, again, the story here too, and Mark will speak to it a little bit when we start talking about CMRI, but there are some dynamics that are just still suggesting that, yes, we are still seeing job creation and we're still seeing growth and we're still seeing a lot of things. It's just the magnitude of what we once saw and the supply that we have. That's where there's still a big mismatch.
Well, certainly the tax base is impacted.
Yeah.
Just to tack onto this, to what degree, so historically, I think with a lot of the takeover of commercial property, the focus has been on the elephant companies, large publicly traded companies with big footprint. One of the things I've thrown out there is, should we consider pivoting towards targeting medium-sized companies, probably private versus publicly traded, globally, and making that the focus, and as opposed to having these big, huge anchor tenants, having a few smaller tenants? Is that in the works?
That's 100%. So if we go to the next slide, just so you guys.
Can
Yeah,
you
please.
just pay me in advance for the slide transition?
I was just gonna say, Tim, that's a great point. I mean, what we see generally, or at least I have in my career, is in a place like, every market's different, right?
Yep.
If you look at downtown DC, it's the larger law firms and a lot of really large tenants that are, full buildings or close to full buildings, and they're making decisions 3 or 4 or 5 years out. Arlington has not recently been that market. If you look at the average deal size, it's probably like 6,500 or 7,000 square feet, practically, meaning that's like a quarter of a floor or a third of a floor. So that's probably, 25 to 30 people. Now, in many cases, the stats that were just up were really interesting because you had 90 attractions, right, and 74. So that's essentially, we're still attracting 80%, as we were at least under that time frame. But the square footage had gone to a third.
Right.
So, and that that I hadn't seen those numbers, before today, but that reflects very much of what my team and I are seeing real time, where there's still a lot of, you're still getting a lot of interest, and you're getting companies that are growing, but they're not going from, 15 to 65 people. They're going from 15 to 20 people, right? And with that type of growth, it's, you need a lot of wins, because there's still been a lot of those kind of larger losses that have resulted in, giving back a full building. So if you're just chipping away, it takes years and years to kind of get back even close to where you were in the past. Kate?
And everything is cyclical, great comments, Tim. I think it continues to have to be an all of the above approach. This does have me channel back to when Victor Hoskins was here, even though we had large wins like Amazon during that time, the focus was really on what they called the gazelles. So those high growth companies, because it's those medium size, but you're taking bets on who's going to grow. However, a challenge that's not cyclical is a little bit more how things are shifting. I know this is something Steve's talked about extensively, but we even saw it as a commission when we did those business appreciation visits a few years ago. You could now you can go into a company and they're growing like crazy. They have more employees, more revenue than ever. And you say, great, are you interested in taking more space? No, we're actually reducing our footprint because we have so many employees that are working remotely. So that's kind of the challenge that's hard to quantify. And that to me is what's different than the cycles we continue to see.
Can I just double tap on what Kate just said? So I run two nonprofits, and I am in my mid-40s, like, staff, let's all come back into the office. And they're like, we love you, but no, we like to come once a week, and we're very productive, and look at our productivity rates. And it's hard for me to argue against that, right? So I, to the extent to which, and you're right, Kate, everything is cyclical. So as we're perhaps getting more demand, but reduced need for commercial footprint, to what extent are we meeting the demand for the flexible office space, per some of the really wonderful presentations that we had last year on, as a small business, gee, I really would like X, it's hard for me to afford my own footprint. Maybe that's an area where we could be exploring.
Absolutely. So yes to all, as Kate said. A couple of things, though, that I wanted to highlight in terms of this year and really what we're focused on. You all heard about National Landing Innovation District. That's going to be kind of a big new launch. It's actually happening this week. And what that's meant to do is to create more investment and demand in those sort of startups, and really try to concentrate, how do we attract and grow from within around a cluster of technology focused industries. So that I think is a big thing to help us on the demand front. The other thing is, we've talked a lot about our tourism and visitor spending numbers and just kind of where that sits. We still remain very committed to trying to develop more funding and more tools to really help with that sector, because that's another demand driver in the county. And then the last thing is our small business team and kind of the expanded partnering that we see on the horizon is that we do have a ton of small businesses. No, they're not big takers of square footage, but they're a huge part of the economy. And so we are launching this past month. We just started the Transformational Challenge, which is all about helping small businesses get started with some cash grants. So we're doing all the things on the demand side. But the big story, and I think what you're going to hear from Mark in just a few moments, is how do we continue to reposition our supply? Because despite all of this, I think we would all still agree that the pure square footage of office that is in Arlington today is probably too much for what that future demand is going to be. So with that, I'll actually turn it over to Mark to talk about CMRI.
So you guys have a hard stop at 9.
We
for
do.
the business, right? And we want to leave a good amount of time for Q&A. So I will try to be about 10 minutes or so, but feel free to ask questions, but there'll be plenty of time for questions afterwards. So thanks everyone for joining us here on to have a discussion in 2026 about the CMRI initiative, which is obviously something we talked a lot about in this room. But just to start us off, and Kate's presentation covered some of this, but obviously some of the stats we continue to look at that frame the broader public discussion of CMRI. Obviously, people are focused on the vacancy rate, and we know why. It's a sort of easy to remember number. We also know why it's not a complete number. It's usually probably the leading number versus something that's really indicative of broader trends like Arlington's tax base being challenged. But certainly the vacancy rate, while sort of hovering around 24%, continues to be high. The most troubling is obviously the continuing shift of our tax base from residential to residential from commercial, even with a strong multifamily sector. And a lot of this is because of, obviously, you've seen probably the headlines of recent news of the 2026 assessments for commercial office being 19% down. So we continue to see that. Obviously, when we looked at the data, the most troubling part, but it's something that in the market that you guys are aware of, is this is not just about building performance, meaning we have buildings that we said, let's look at the ones that just signed a new lease and have someone moved in and let's see how those are 10% down. Okay. And the reason is cap rates are driving the decision, describing the analysis. So when we look at that, we really are looking at overall market health, and we're looking at how we, in a macro level trend of overall lack of confidence in the office sector, how Arlington nationally and multinationally is really separating ourselves as a unique competitive advantage, because that's how we get our cap rates down. That's how we get our values back up. I also want to say that one thing that's important to note is that we also track multifamily, and multifamily has been keeping us afloat for the past several decades. That doesn't mean that's going to last forever. So we're looking to see if there's any signs of weakness in that. We would like to be proactive about that rather than getting to a crisis point and then having to react, sort of thinking about prematurely. So Nick's discussion of hotel to resi is a perfect example of where an initial reaction by the market to try to maybe soften some of the absorption of multifamily. Are we going to be talking about that? And I think the board does want to have a policy discussion about that as well. Sorry. So when we think about CMRI, the evolving market context, obviously when we started this, we were looking at a broader trend of changing utilization of space. Once again, remind everyone this was not a pandemic issue. This was overall hoteling, teleworking. People were using less space per employee. And we had a lot of deferred maintenance in our regulatory structure, a lot of just things that didn't make any sense we needed to fix, right? So that was that first push. Let's just get away from these, the use table amendments and those sort of things. Then we looked at COVID, obviously had an element of structural change, further structural change, and our commercial office markets collapsing. So we looked at big swings to address office obsolescence and oversupply. And now we're looking at even more macro trends, such as tech dislocation, AI. We've talked about the workforce problem of profits aren't necessarily leading to job growth and therefore to space fills. And then the Fed City question. You know, I think none of us want to react to the past year, but I think we want to think about, is the federal city going to be just different over the next 20 years? And do we need to react to that? Okay. So in another chart form, just looking at April 2022, when we first went to the board, when we looked at a new approach to regulatory flexibility and folks in the use tables, we looked at the big swings and the office transformation policy. The EDC obviously provided a working group, which we are still obviously we're sort of working with. I'd like to hear more about your thoughts on as you enter to 2026. But obviously a fair amount of 2020, almost all of 2024 and 2025 was focused on a couple of things, which was one, implementing adaptive reuse, which we think we've successfully done, although we need to get to the next phase of construction starts, which we think we're close to in a couple. And then some ongoing projects like assigns and adaptive reuse admin regs. So follow-up. So if we started just and sort of said, what are we working on now? We would sort of say we have the some additional quick hits we could start on that we've done some initial work on, like storage, self-storage, maybe a little bit of work on data centers, a little bit of work on live work, kind of quick hit studies that we could scope pretty quickly, but not sort of earth changers, not sort of major movers, just sort of cleaning up once again. We definitely are going to get done the as we talked about the administrative regulations for adaptive reuse, but there's more cleanup we could do. We have to prioritize whether that cleanup of the zoning ordinance and the policy is worth it versus taking on other challenges. And then the minor major admin process, which has been a little bit in limbo over the past several years, being picked away. We think there's an opportunity to sort of maybe think about that resources constrained, albeit to think about how we can continue to move forward that pilot. So once again, the important point is we are struggling with the issue of resource constraints, right? While we are focusing on the urgency and the depth of the issue is becoming stronger. So what we have entered in 2026 as a leadership team is to sort of say, what are we focusing on? We need to really make sure our limited resources are being focused on the highest impact, biggest needle movers. So what we want to start a conversation today and then into the next several months as we continue to sort of figure out 2026 work plan is, what does this 3.0 look like? And we're talking about focusing, getting more focus and pilots and getting real targeted and solving problems, but also thinking more holistically. And so trying to meet both of those in a context of limited resources. So a couple of major concepts, and then we'll get to your discussion. One is, obviously, we're doubling down on this focus, and someone mentioned it, I think, the focus on supply and demand, right? We focus a lot on supply, about removing supply, but obviously a big part of this has also been on making our supply more attractive to be filled, not just to go away. So continuing to focus on what are the drivers of occupancy, and are we always the best position to capture that? So we've heard a lot about, do you have buildings that we could fly drones in and test? No, but could we think about that? Well, let's create a policy, let's create some structure around sort of how we would do that. Really using our real estate as trying to be as tied to the demand side as possible. Urban placemaking. So our group is going to take on a bigger urban placemaking role with our public art team, but also broader. And we're really going to be doubling down this year and beyond on place as a big part of our resiliency initiative, because we think this is the longer term resiliency. This is, if you're a great place that people want to live, work, go, then all other things will sort of cycles will sort of come and go, but you'll always sort of rise to the top, right? We need to refocus on that. And not that we don't, but continue to focus. Shift in the community conversation. So some of you have been aware, we had a conversation, a couple of good conversations last year with the CivFed and with the chamber about, are we doing development, the way we've been doing development for the past 30 years of incentive-based zoning, does it need to change? And do we need more of a partnership model that looks at community benefits and development and what it delivers is more of a true partnership? And interestingly enough, the chamber loved the idea, CivFed loved the idea. So the question is, what are we missing, right? Let's start that conversation, because if CivFed and chamber agree, then who the hell is disagreeing at this point, right? So I think we want to make sure we really want to know sort of how we connect those really good signs of people wanting to Nick's point, wanting to have conversations, wanting to solve problems. Market intelligence, we've always had with Troy, a great market intelligence team. We're going to continue to amp that up and continue to curate more retail, the data dashboard. We want this to continue to be driving real policy decisions. And then finally, I know Kate's mentioned this, resource constraints just means that we need to make sure our resources being allocated appropriately. It also means partnerships are incredibly important. So you're going to see really a furthering of our relationships with bids, even more so, partnerships, the chamber, NAIA, everyone, to try to really get to this, right? And obviously our community organizations, CivFed, the civic associations. So I think there's a whole bunch of folks that come to this table, but these partnerships are key. And particularly as you start talking about program elements like the innovation, not the innovation district, the innovation coordination. That's a perfect example of where, just in terms of dollars and cents and resources and staff, that will come together. It's much more powerful than if we just did it, or if the bid just did it, or if it just was its own entity. So with that said, I would like to really sort of kick it back to you. I'm happy to moderate, but I think you guys will probably have a lot of good questions and comments on sort of what is your guidance heading into 3.0, knowing the resource constraints, depth of the challenge, but a real desire to sort of think about moving the needle, continue the successes. What are our successes? What are our lessons learned? What are some of the challenges, local and macro? And then where in the process do you see the most friction, uncertainty, or pain points? And then stakeholder groups are perspectives to consider. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is we are going to be looking out to have this conversation broader. And what we really want to do is, to this last point, is really get to specifics. So we can start, like, versus the process takes too long is helpful. It's too costly is helpful, but where is it too long? Where is it too costly? So we can really start to target. So I think that's all I had. Back to Kate or Nick or whoever wants to.
I'm just going to say, I think we want to hear from the room. As Mark said, this is the beginning of just some listening sessions to make sure that as we're trying to prioritize our work plan around CMRI, we are getting to what you all perceive as the near term kind of challenges, but also the longer term structural things that we should or should not be tackling right now. So open to discussion or comments. We want to hear from you.
Yeah, I'd just start with a question. It comes back to the pipeline of the adaptive reuse. So I believe the first hearing was, and approvals were back in July with the JPGs
Yes.
will become the resident apartments and
the Fairfax.
Okay, yes, okay.
Yep.
So I think we've been at 7 buildings and those numbers, which by the way are great, but has that slowed? And if it's slowed, can you really attribute it to anything in particular? Do you have any ideas?
So, yeah, and just so this context of numbers, so one of these applications is still in process. So that's the JBG Smith 1901 South Bell. That is with the Center Park. So that's a bit of a public discussion about community benefits and adaptive reuse, which has been, I think, still very productive in sort of getting us to a point this year. We're going to prove that or get some level of agreement with JBG Smith on that. But yeah, so we have seen a slowdown in what we call sort of the single, sort of easy, single purchase. They bought it for cents on the dollar. They came in and we have seen some slowing down, although still continued interest. What we're actually seeing, however, is because the depth of the problem, like this is anything we talked about with the adaptive reuse, where the market takes longer to get there, we're actually seeing larger projects come in. So JBG Smith is a good example of that. But I'm not breaking any news stories, so it'll be very public. Brookfield is going to come in for a conversion for their old TSA site instead of redevelopment. So they had a large scale redevelopment on the books, approved for 3 times the density. Great project, still a great project. They just can't. So they're working with Zell, a local developer, to sort of do those as conversions and to sort of figure, we'll figure it out in 30 years. So that's another example of that's 800,000 square feet.
And that would be adaptive reuse, or is that?
They're going to be pure conversion. They are working with us. It may not go under the adaptive reuse ordinance. This is kind of a bit because it's adding a floor. And we didn't, and we purposely tried to not solve that problem back in November of last year. But we're going to still get it done quickly, I think, and it's still going to be a great project. So we don't care whether it's called adaptive reuse or not, whether it's just a good project. So yes, but that will be essentially adaptive reuse with a lot of open space improvements, however, though, too, because that's in that green ribbon, which was approved. So that's an example of where we're seeing a project where I said, no, that's not going to go to conversion. That's too big of a project to go. We're going to get the little ones. We're getting the little ones are kind of harder to figure out. The bigger ones with the big capital have a little more to push to sort of get those through.
First, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate everything you're doing, everything you always do. Amazing partner. Appreciate all this incredible work. One comment and then a question. The comment, and again, to the feedback piece. I know you've heard this before and Kate has as well, but from the chamber's perspective, and I think the commissions, it's in line with the commission's previous documents, and we have several former commissioners in the land use space who have rolled off, I feel like I need to speak for, but the MMA piece is just vital. I think that was the one piece we were hoping to have done last year.
Yeah.
And that's consistent with what we've heard from all of our stakeholders. And I think if you go to NAOP as well as the chamber, other groups, you'll hear that that will fix a lot of those things. And I think your questions down the line are those great specifics so that you know what to fix within that space. What are the pain points that of moving something from a major to a minor or a minor to an admin that would just, again, be a win for everybody that should be non-controversial. So as you look at focus, that would be my plea is to prioritize that. Cause I know we were hopeful for that last year when I spoke with, again, Ryan about that in the past, it was that, he said it was CPHD staffing was why we didn't quite get there. So then to the question back, you talk about resource constraints, which we certainly understand this is a tough county budget year. However, the ADC's role is to advise the board. So as we get ready for said budget letter that Nick referenced, what types of resource asks would help you to be able to further some of these things you'd like to?
Yeah,
Is
so
it planning? Is it AD staff? What would
Yeah,
that be?
we're working in real time on that very question because it's kind of changing week to week depending on what Rep 26 and down here 27 looks like. But certainly your question is apt, which is that the reminder for everyone is that the road doesn't start and begin with AED, right? We have to sort of hand it off to CPHD. We work with our team. And so our resource constraint is not just us, it's the entire process. It's also things like commissions and citizen groups, and everyone has some bottlenecks, right? And so I think the resources that we'll probably end up asking for is things like classic, sort of like if you gave us more just staff time, we could get more stuff done. But also things like perhaps the greatest resource is sort of risk aversion. That if we could have more risk taking, that would be a greater resource perhaps than so I think we'll sort of be putting those in context of it's not all of what we have to spend and what we have to put in, but if we make the processes easier. And then there's other things the board's going to have a decision which is outside of this. I'll just reference it. Things like, I think everyone here hopefully when the board talks about the low res study and CMRI, those two things are massive. Each of one of those is a massive workload for any county. And so, and then you have the comp plan. And so all those are important. And the point is that they're all going to be important at the same time. And I think we just need to be mindful of, it's easy for people to sort of say, we should do all three. Well, that's just not possible. So we're going to try to fix into that. But I think to your point, it's not just us. We could write policy papers, and that still may be good to sort of continue to talk the message, but to get real policy change into regulatory change, we can do some of it, but we can't do all of it.
Thank you. And I don't want to monopolize the time, but I think with the feedback, that's what we heard as an EDC exec as well, in terms of adaptive reuse, that there were rollout challenges with other county departments and you all worked through that beautifully. But I think that's some of the lessons learned, of course, that as you implement new things, what can we do? And, what can Mark Schwartz do to continue to culturally work with the department? So everybody sees this as a positive thing, not just AED.
Now, in fairness to them, they would argue they have issues without the way we rolled it out. So I mean, the point is, it's like culture takes time, right? There's no good or bad actors there. It's really just about culture change.
Thank you.
I was just gonna piggyback on what Kate was saying about the changes needed for signage and the process. I'll just give one case example since you asked about specific pain points. Just a real world example. One of my clients, Kimco, who owns Pentagon Center in the middle of Pentagon City, really brought a lot of change, positive change, I think, to that area with its retail. Just one example of and Charles and Stephen will probably identify this as with this as small business owners, is there's a new tenant they've been trying to bring in for months called Takagi Coffee. It's a Japanese coffee house, has a location in LA, maybe others that I'm not aware of. We've been dealing for 6 months with the radical notion of having a Norin fabric, which is the vertical fabric with a slit in the middle of it that traditionally marks the entrance to a Japanese restaurant. We submitted an admin change late summer or last fall, sort of went around in circles with staff as to how to handle this animal that is this fabric hanging at the edge of the sidewalk. We were eventually told that we needed to get a vacation from DES to allow for an intrusion into the sidewalk zone. This despite showing that this is literally going to be a 1/4-inch fabric waving at the side of a 8-foot sidewalk. But that sets in motion a 2-month process and a filing fee and county board action to allow that to happen. We filed that and then we're told, well, you're also going to need to get a minor site plan amendment because you're encroaching into the right of way. And I said, can I just remind everybody, we're talking about a piece of fabric. This is a cool thing. This is what Arlington says it wants. It's up in the air. It's not going to block a stroller. It's not going to block a wheelchair. But anyway, Kimco's had to spend, tens of thousands of dollars and we're still not at a solution. So, the idea has come up well, are we going to have to tell this Japanese LA-based tea house that you either won't be coming to Arlington or you'll have to dispatch? And another concession, just by the way, is because we have, real allergies towards signage, they can't have their logo on this fabric because that would constitute a sign. And then we would also need to come up with more sign area and navigate that. So it's just going to be a blank white piece of fabric. But yeah, it's consumed a lot of time. And then another pain point, just macro level, over the last 20 plus years, I've been doing this type of work. I have seen, my phone's been ringing less and less often by people who are sniffing around properties in Arlington. They're going to Prince William. I'm now almost more of a Prince William lawyer than I have been Arlington. So I really liked what you said about the county being in partnership. And Andy Van Horn a few years ago was at a meeting. I think Ryan was at that. I can't remember if you were there, where he said Arlington and the civics associations need to get their head around the idea that the project itself, bringing new housing, bringing a new business, that's the community benefit. Just keeping Arlington vibrant, never mind all these things we want and are desirable, but the affordable housing contributions, the contributions towards parks, those are all important things. But I'm just seeing more and more of my clients say, I've got to go out to the hinterland because I just can't even make a deal pencil. And I know that even if I do, I have to take the 6 to 9 month opportunity I have further outside the Beltway. I'm going to have to take that because my investment committee does not like the sound of a 1.5 year, 2 year process. with all those added costs in Arlington. So that's my rant. So thank you for
No,
listening.
it's a good point, not to respond to that, because I think that's a great point and great specificity. And I always joke that sort of, it seems like we always argue about who put the hole in the boat rather than who's going to help fix it. As well as we're all sinking together, because we are all sinking, as a community, we're all in this together, right? So I do think that the issue of how we think about the sign ordinance is one that I think is the signs have always been. But I think this conversation, I think, is going to be important to really sort of acknowledge that there has to be this sort of thinking about just at one fell swoop. This is tied into the idea that there's sort of, at some point it was decided that the right of way and that the use of signs was, there was an ideal that we were trying to meet, right? And I think the question is does that ideal have to be challenged before we sort of start to pick away at the edges, right? We don't want to be Times Square. Well, there's a difference between Times Square and Pentagon City in terms of signage, right? So what do we want to be a little closer to, Times Square, or a little bit closer to, a place that has no signs? And so I think that discussion is one that I know CPHD has taken a lot of time trying to get this discussion and have the board into that. And I think we need to keep pushing the board, meaning we as staff, but I think obviously the commission as well. But a lot of times it comes down to that, right? How willing do they have that sort of discussion? Sarah, did you have a comment?
I did. I was so happy to see that you put up there, urban placemaking creates a true competitive edge.
Yeah.
And that you are working with your public art team. I just want to encourage, and maybe there's an opportunity to partner somewhere with actual performing arts, because public art, visual art, definite placemaking, performing arts creates events that draw people in as well, even more so in a way. So just want to put that out there and just speak to, there's also a bunch of empty theaters in Arlington that used to be, full of art groups, but for one reason or another, they're empty. One is at 1801 South Bell. So I've been trying to get JPG Smith to chat about maybe activating that theater and haven't gotten too far so far, even though they did say they were open to it. So just something to consider is bringing in performing arts groups to chat as well about that.
Right. Yes, and we obviously, it goes without saying, but we work obviously very closely with CAD. I actually sit next to CAD, so I sit down at 3700 for most of the week. So we work, obviously, our urban placemaking group is a really way to sort of have a new conversation about public art, arts investment, physical investments, and really think about places as a combination of all those things. And I will say, to answer to Evans, I just want to mention this. If you have a question, the first thing to do is call Jane. So that's the first thing. And then, but I do think that the resource constraints do often, something we always sort of balance is the sort of, we always keep a full stock of time to respond to things that are, someone calls us, I need something done next week. How can you help me navigate under the current processes? And so we do that. And so please, I'm not joking, please call us if you have a question and you feel like you're losing a tenant or you feel like it's just not, and we'll do what we can. And then we often use that as, let's try to solve that problem holistically. That takes a different process, but we often use it as like, we've gone through this now 2 times. This is time to fix it, rather than doing it, try to Band-Aid it one at a time.
You said something which kind of piqued my interest. As much as I would like Nick's heard my bias around live work, creating the urbanist paradise of having, small companies and artists and everyone, occupying the space. Pragmatically, I think there is a demand driver we could benefit from, and that is data centers. And in the past, I looked at urban data centers a bazillion years ago. At that time, the demand and the value for residential property was so much greater that the concept of using expensive footprint in an urban area for data center was nonsensical. I would actually argue things have flipped now, particularly in this community. And with the pushback against data centers in Prince William, in Loudoun, as people realize they suck up arable land and water, is there an opportunity where we could leverage the high concentration of essentially commercial properties that have the one benefit that the hinterlands don't have, which is physical distance to consumers, right? It's physics, there's latency. Where if I've got a data center in an urban environment where I don't need signage, it's in a building that has basically been built around commercial tenants, not residential tenants, I can provide high-speed connectivity to my users. And the analogy I keep looking at is Hoboken, New Jersey. Hoboken was a wasteland for a while. Then people realized, oh, wait a minute, if we just put all the data centers to service all the high frequency traders in Wall Street in Hoboken, we're going to get a bunch of revenue. And now Hoboken has been revitalized as kind of this vestigial limb of Wall Street. Is that something we've thought about?
So a couple of great points there. One is that I think the history of sort of what we've made as a county investment, this is sort of some of you that maybe have been following this somewhat closely, but some maybe it's not. And Amazon is well aware of this, is the idea of we invested in what's called Connect Arlington, which is what we had a major roads and transportation project that was putting in what we call ITS, which is having the fiber that connects all light signals. And, and when we did that, we sort of said, let's put in a whole bunch more fiber we don't need, but we may need in the future, right? And I think that was a investment well met because the roads were open and the fiber was cheap at the time. And then we didn't have a lot of use for it. We were sort of making small deals with some universities here and there. And then eventually JVG Smith came along and sort of said, we're building out this innovation physical district, right? Forget the programming and we're building out the infrastructure here. And Amazon had a lot to do with that. And they said, we need your fiber and we need your access. And if you license stuff, we can build the laterals and we can build all the infrastructure. One of those pieces of infrastructure that they have built and are continuing to build is the edge data center. So what their view is that, and what a lot of real estate view is that the large data center world that dominates the headlines is not really, can't play in that space. We don't have the space. Quite frankly, we'd be last in line in Dominion waiting for the next discussion of when we're going to get the power. I think quite frankly, it would disrupt our grid to the point it would disrupt some of our other, like building housing and other things like that. So I think there's other than that, but I think that doesn't mean it's not an opportunity. Our edge data center is where kind of you're talking about, which is where everyone is. What happens with that latency redundancy? And in national landing, I think JVG Smith talks a lot about it, Amazon talks a lot about it, but I think in the innovation sort of we'll talk a lot about it. But I think the idea of, I think maybe people don't understand how much of that is already occurring in national landing in terms of the network of fiber and edge data centers and latency that JVG Smith can now offer its tenants is already kind of right up there at and I don't know, JVG Smith also bought bandwidth from the federal government. So they have massive bandwidth to be able to radio signal this stuff. So that stuff is happening. Now the question is, it's like a slow burn of how you then sort of build upon that through the innovation work of selling that, right?
But I guess what I'm speaking to is specifically private data centers.
Yeah.
So basically not so much leveraging JVG, but saying I've got an edge data center in a building that's unoccupied in, Clarendon.
Yeah.
Can I make that a private data center serving a corporate client versus piggybacking off of the?
Well, just to be clear, I mean, we would view, all we did from a public, we don't have the public doesn't have any role once we provided the fiber in that edge network. So that's all private.
Gotcha.
JVG is putting it together because they own a lot of real estate and they have the ability to do that. But their goal is they're monetizing that, right? That's their goal.
Okay.
So they are absolutely doing that. And they are hoping that the large users and small users are using that to create to build on their own networks. And that really is creating that sort of like tech, city where you walk outside and you can be on your phone, you can be on your, and everything is just sort of connected, right? So I think we're very excited about that and we'll continue to talk about that and continue to support that. I think that doesn't mean that the use cases and some of the other regulations, like, well, how do we have driverless cars? We don't have the regulations for driverless cars. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that investment actually is fully beneficial, meaning all that tech that's put in, it's designed for a reason, and that's for all these other things that are going to happen. And we need to have the land use and regulatory structure be able to accommodate that sort of stuff as well.
Okay, I think we have time for one more comment, two more.
Go ahead.
Paula.
I like the data center idea and working in economic development with like other areas. I'm fascinated by the concept of that. Also, and there's probably somebody, I'm sure there are a lot of people here who know more about this than I do, just as a user. I live a few blocks from here. I go back and forth. I'm gone on the weekends. I can't believe how often power goes out here. I mean, for being 3 miles from the Pentagon and, a few blocks from DARPA, I'm baffled by how long it goes out and how long it's out for when it actually goes down. And just from a public safety standpoint, I mean, that's the biggest concern. But then if we talk about data centers, that is something that would exacerbate that issue.
And if I just, Mark, thank you. I always love your presentations and learn so much from them. But I want to go back to sort of if I think about sort of bigger swings over the longer term, capitalizing on our competitive place here in Northern Virginia and how we serve as oftentimes a gateway to other communities across the Commonwealth. We have a new administration in, they're getting settled and they'll have their own economic development priorities and policies. My question for the EDC and the AED is when would be a good time for us to go to Richmond to both understand what those investments are going to look like and to what extent we are in a geographic location where we should be sort of understanding where the push is going to come and then making that more welcoming, incentivizing that here. As well as Paula, I just love the work that George Mason does. I'm so proud of the number of universities and colleges that we have in the county. And my question is, are we saturated in understanding what those colleges and universities, either within the Commonwealth or as a gateway to DC, but here, could we be engaging them more to understand what further growth do they want to see in when it comes to industry investments and advanced industry, biotech, et cetera, and making more of a pitch to those universities as they are partnering with, bless you, industry or others. You should be investing in these spaces, but make sure that you're considering Arlington County as a place where you need to be. Look at the ecosystem of colleges we already have. When we have sort of a low ebb in sort of commercial activity or demand for space, could we be doing more to make sure that we are saturating the academic plus industry investment pipeline that's in line with, I think, where our economy is going to be going?
Yeah, I'll let Kate address the Richmond issue, but I think we always, when we started this, we looked at sort of like a simple thing, like we didn't know how universities in our office buildings don't use permit, right?
Yeah.
And I just always joke, there's places that are gown versus town, right? Where the university eating the town. We're somehow town versus gown. We actually make it harder for universities to be here. And so I think I agree. That's been a big part of our focus, has been sort of how we make those connections, how we allow them to be part of our expansion, our fabric, rather than seen as universities that have their own impact, right? Versus so, and then the Richmond question, Kate, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so there is a new administration, there's a new commerce, Secretary of Commerce, and we are setting up meetings to basically have the beginnings of those conversations. I think the good thing, you all know, we said goodbye to Matt Weinstein last meeting. He and I have a follow-up to just make sure that we can get some one-on-one time. I think that where we are looking for help right now from the ADP in particular is to elevate again on the attraction side of how can we leverage the state's power to broadcast for investment up here. And they've got a team that does that. So that's one area. But the other thing is the university system. And I would say George Mason and Virginia Tech, particularly Virginia Tech's, campus down in National Land, we're going to see continued investments there. And so it's really about how do we continue to partner and leverage. I mean, Paul's sitting here with us today. So a lot, I think, to come on that front where we just need to keep leaning into those relationships and make sure that, I think one thing that's been brought up is just, are we still producing the right pipeline of the workforce to meet the moment we're into? And I think more to come on that. But yeah, both of those are on our radar moving forward.
So there's also like a leveling of, just to understand. So Virginia Tech has a 500 student footprint. Mason has a 41,000 student footprint. So there's a big difference, and student housing is an issue. For the present student.
I love this in part because we have a lot of office space that we can try to convert to something that could be affordable, welcoming student housing, and also perhaps housing for entrepreneurs in the Commonwealth who would love to bring their ideas or their work here, but they just can't afford to make it happen, right?
Imagine graduating from a Virginia university and being given keys to a low-cost lease in Arlington in a live-work property that won't have a lot of, fancy conveniences, but allows you to keep your social network here, your research here. Just imagine what might happen with that.
I love it.
Stephen, last comment.
Thank you. And building on what Evan said, and I'll be brief here, Mark. we talk about a lot about attracting new businesses, which obviously is so important, I think, to everyone in the room and of course to my businesses as well. Retention of existing businesses is important. Expansion of existing businesses is important. We look at doing different things and, I did the math, we just, 3 little restaurants, we just crossed $250 million in top line in our history. It's not that small. So I'm not looking for that, but thank you. But I mean, my point is part of the ROI in that regard is the ability to have direct and collaborative conversations with someone in the county who recognizes our commitment of time and effort and capital in a way that kind of helps to meet us where we're at. And maybe this is my fault, and I really respect what all of you guys do, and Kate and whatever, but if there's one person, placemaking can be a nebulous term sometimes. And what are the mechanics of placemaking that allow a retail tenant or an operator connect with someone at the county, figure out how to either remove barriers to entry or be creative in getting something to happen quickly, particularly as it relates to a biophilic nature of outdoor placemaking. And if there's one person or one department that I can go to and that my many fellow Arlington members at RAMW can go to, I don't know who that is. And if you could help me identify that, that would be great.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what we're hoping to create out of their place, but that's always been us, I think, and then we work with planning. I do say that, we have, one of our biggest challenges and biggest focuses over the past several years, and certainly the COVID, was the idea of outdoor seating, right? Yeah. And as you understand, sort of, we came as a community, when I came here 15 years ago, public places are places you read a book and that you shouldn't have to pay a cent to ever step in. And I was like, well, for many public places, the buying something is part of the experience, a margarita, some chips, something to hang with a friend. And so the point is, we were even that far apart. We're getting closer. So I think the next step is to sort of say, how do we see not retail tenants adjacent to a plaza as sort of something to be managed, but more something where the customer doesn't need to know the difference between why they're stepping into one place versus the other. It's a seamless experience. And I think we talk a lot about that. So the urban placemaking, one of the biggest things is going to be finding these plazas, these open spaces that don't have any life to them. Often are probably are next to something where a commercial space that could be alive and then having those conversations. But please reach out to us as well. If you have a good idea, call me, call Jane. Yeah. And we will at least take the call and start that conversation.
10-second comment. It's worth looking at the quote unquote nightmare concept.
Yeah.
DC had a nightmare, worked directly for Mayor Bowser, and that created real liaisons. It created really positive outcomes and built retail business in the city. Maybe we don't call it nightmare since no one's out after 9 o'clock at night anymore. But hospitality mayor, but there's room for being intentional in that kind of resource within the county.
So I would just look at for 2 seconds, if you're interested in that, the Clegg, the Clarendon nightlife sort of group.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually live entertainment group.
Yeah.
Live entertainment and dancing. We actually regulate dancing in this county, if you didn't know. So welcome back to Footloose. But the idea is that Clegg is a pilot to try to better that relationship where a more open relationship between police, staff, enforcement, and the restaurants. We find that universally, the restaurants want to do the right thing. They want to have their bouncers follow the rules. They want to work with police appropriately. And it's really about us having that communication on a night by night basis. So there'll be a lot to what that nightlife may or may look like concept over the next year with the board. So stay tuned. We'll surely brief you. Thank you.
I could quickly just widen the aperture a little bit to include things like theater going as well into that. So.
Thank you, Mark. Great discussion. A lot of input here. And we know that you're probably busier than ever with less resources. So we appreciate, your ongoing creativity and thoughtfulness and dedication to this. And, please let us know if there are areas where we can help you. I think that one thing that I'd like to focus on is, yes, there are lots of different ideas and issues, but trying to focus on those that are the most likely to actually happen and get implemented and the highest impact. Big wins and small wins, all types, they all count. So thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
Everyone. Thank you.
Okay, Meredith, for an update on programming engagement.
Okay, I'll be very quick. So if you all can look in your materials, there's a piece of paper called EDC Engagement and Media Guidelines. If you can pull that out. I'm actually going to start on the second forwarded line there. So as you know from the start of this year, we looked at how we wanted to be out in the county more, listening, understanding developments that are happening and bringing those developments back here for discussion along with our economic development peers. So on that, at the beginning of this year, we looked to reappoint and make new appointments for county-wide groups where EDC has either been invited to have an official liaison or where there might be adjacent or unofficial liaisons or interest there. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to Paula for continuing to serve in our Climate Action Plan Advisory Group. We are looking to both have, for each of these groups, the ones that EDC has a liaison to, there's only one volunteer that is permitted to go, but we wanted to designate a backup volunteer. So if our primary volunteer cannot go or is looking to compare notes with a colleague and bring more of that discussion back here in the room, that they have a partner to do that. So a big thank you to Keely McKenna, who I believe is dialing in today, for volunteering to being an alternate to Paula. And Keely has a background as a naturalist, spends a lot of time volunteering and working in our parks, and has a natural interest there. For the Transportation Future Advisory Group, Keely McKenna has raised her hand for that role. And so she'll be stepping in that role. And Evan, I would be grateful if you could find time to connect with Keely to sort of download what you've learned and the work that you've been doing on behalf of the EDC there and help her transition to representing the EDC at that group. And Evan, thank you for stepping into the comprehensive planning role with Matt moving to Richmond. It's exciting to have you in that role. And so for those three key leads, Paula for climate, Keely for transportation, Evan for comprehensive planning moving forward. When we get to this part of the agenda, I'm going to be pausing and allowing those three key leads to step in with a, hey, this is what we're talking about right now. You may not have something to raise every meeting, and that's totally fine. But as you find something that is material to raise, if you can just let me have a heads up in advance, we're making sure that we're planning enough time for you. And if you have any official business, we'll make even more time for you on the agenda. But very much appreciate their leadership there. If there's anyone who wants to be a backup for transportation or comprehensive planning, so a backup to Keely and a backup to Evan, if you could let me and Caitlin know. Thank you, Caitlin. Actually, I want to say thank you. She has been a key partner with me and with Nick and with Brad as we sort of figure this out, looked at the backgrounds of our commissioners and made connections there. So if you'd like to be considered for a backup volunteer for transportation or comprehensive planning, please let Caitlin and I know, and we'll take it forward. I just want to give a shout out to Brian and to Kate for their leadership on the Regional Workforce Council. We already have 2 reps from EDC who are on that council. So again, as you see relevant issues to bring into discussion, we'd love to make space for that, as well as a huge thank you to Tim Jones. So Chair DeFerranti had talked about a Northern Virginia Regional Commission that he was representing Arlington on and the work that they're doing on an AI economy action plan. So Tim has volunteered to be an unofficial EDC liaison to that commission. I'll be connecting him with Matt. And as they're having discussions on AI economy and planning for the region, Tim is both there as a thought partner to our county board chair, but also as a thought partner to the AED and to the EDC as we move our way forward there. At the top of the page there is, and when you go back to the materials that Caitlin sent, you can click on the link that says here and you'll see a whole list of all of, I think it's like 48 countywide advisory groups that we have. If you see an advisory group there that you would like as an EDC commissioner to just show up and to be present and to listen. We don't have an official role in the other advisory groups, but they're, as you know, public groups where you can go and listen and get involved. If you're interested in getting involved in any of the other commissions there, again, unofficially, please let me know and I'd be happy to help make connections there. I want to say thank you to Sarah Barker who has raised her hand to be that thought partner and volunteer to listen into the Arlington Commission of the Arts convenings and bring those discussions as relevant back here. Lastly, well, two lastlies. We heard Kate talk about the grand opening of the Look Art Gallery on February 20th. So the AD, we have a lot of events that typically happen every month, and they give us a list of events, but we have asked AD to raise up the key events where we'd love to have EDC representation. So I'd love to ask for a volunteer, if anyone can make the February 20th opening of the Look Art Gallery. I would love that. And then the following meeting, when you come back, we'll ask you what you thought about it and how things went. At the bottom of the page are media guidelines. These comes from the county board. We want you out as ambassadors in the county. We want you listening, engaging, asking questions as an EDC representative at the events that you show up with. And the meeting guidelines below are for those countywide volunteers or officials. If you are speaking with the press, these are helpful guidelines to make sure that things go as planned there too. So just last point, any volunteers for the February 20th? Thank you, Sarah. And I might join you with my teenage kids actually there too.
I'll be there too.
Awesome. Okay, actually, so for these public events, are we still with that 2 EDC member rule? Does it matter?
Not really. I mean, as long as you're not there to discuss business, Caitlin's looking at me, maybe I'm not saying the right thing.
As long as there are events that are fully
Public,
open to the
yeah.
public, it's fine. If there are more than 2 of you, just please don't go in a corner and discuss EDC business.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Meredith. It's a great update. I know you've been putting a ton of time in this with Kayla and Kate. So thank you all. It's 40 days into the year, and this is, I would have thought by looking at this, you've been working on this for 6 months. So appreciate it. A lot of thoughtfulness, and thank you to everybody who's volunteered. I've only been on this commission for about 3 years, but I don't remember ever being so organized. So yeah, that's part of our EDC 101 NomGov and best practices. So thanks again. Related to that, Brad Mason does have a conflict today. So we're not going to do an update there, but I can just assure you that he's hard at work related to what we discussed or what he discussed and brought up last month. So we'll likely hear more from him in March. So a couple of things we're going to do a little bit different this time. So we're going to be adjourning in a minute, and then we're going to do this EDC orientation or 101, if you will. It's our first time doing it, so bear with us. Might be a little rusty, but anybody is welcome to stay. If anybody needs to leave, move on, that's completely fine. And then we'll just go through that for 15 or 20 minutes. Before we do that and before we adjourn, is there any new business or any comments from the commission? Okay, we're officially adjourned. All right, why don't we take 2 minutes? And again, anybody who needs to leave, that's completely fine. And then come back and we'll do the quick orientation. All right, so I want to get everybody out of here by 9:30. So let's go ahead and get started. So as we discussed in January, what we're going to be looking to do is obviously this commission is fluid. There's, always folks that are running out of term and there's always new commissioners. So what we wanted to start is I think anybody on a commission within Arlington does have a certain level of onboarding, but specific to EDC, we just wanted to give everybody a refresher and a 101 that I don't know that any of us have ever gotten before. So, high level, what we're going to do is just quickly go over the charter and the framework of prosperity that I believe some of you had worked on back in 2022. So we'll cover that, and then we're going to tag team a few of these things here, but we're going to talk through advisory groups. And then, I think for the most part, we're pretty aware of what AED does, but we'll hear a little bit more from Kate. So with that, let's get going. So let's move to the charter here and the mission. And obviously there's governing documents, but we have tried, last year under Kevin's leadership, for all of our meetings to make sure that they're touching on some of the central themes, or one of the central themes at least, that are within the mission and the framework for prosperity. So, simply put, it's our responsibility to advise and assist the board and work with them and AED in really kind of being the eyes and ears in the business community, and helping be advocates for Arlington as an economic base. Vision will not only sustain but accelerate the economy to add wealth, employment, and quality to the community. So, you can see on here what the objectives are. I think what I'd spend a little bit more time on today is the framework for prosperity. And just so everybody knows, I think we have the document somewhere, but I know it's, I don't know, publicly posted, but from late 2022 under Avril's leadership, she had done a great job in putting together the framework for prosperity 2.0. It was originally developed, I believe, in around 2008. And 14 or 15 years later, obviously, a lot of things are the same, but a lot of things have changed. Those 5 buttons at the bottom, in a way, at least the way I look at it, is that they're all somewhat distinct from each other, but at the same time, they can all be related and interwoven. So starting from the left, robust business infrastructure, and I'll talk a little bit more about each of those. Sustainable economy, innovative workforce, distinctive place, and equitable and inclusive business environment. So I spent some time over the weekend, looking back, at the framework for prosperity, and it's about a 15-page document. But starting with goal 1, there are a few things that I really think are important that hopefully we can have some impact on here. So creating available and desirable real estate products that meet business needs, ability to attract a skilled and diverse workforce with an inviting and accessible workplace community. And something else here I think is really important that I circled, in helping the board and AED create a predictable regulatory climate within the development world and any really kind of private sector. A lack of clarity is not a good thing. So the more clear that we can be and help the board with as far as development, what's going to be allowed, what wouldn't be allowed, where there's going to be flexibility, I think is of paramount importance. Moving to sustainable economy, a balanced and diverse economy. If I look personally at some of the things I'm working on within the county, it's all different types of companies that I think is great, right? I don't think we want to be a community that's overly hedged or unhedged in one type of, demand driver, because, when times aren't good, it could be really tough. But this is a, economy that we want to make sure we continue to attract all different types of businesses. There's not a right or wrong type. see, I'm trying to get through here with my Cliff's notes here. Innovative workforce, it really comes down to workforce development. I know that Steve Cooper had to leave, but he has some great programming with that, with education and training for folks within the county, which I encourage you all to learn more about. Creative housing options, again, we're talking about that with adaptive reuse, and I think that's of huge importance. Tim, I'll live, work, play. And then again, within the sustainable economy, I mean, we're, as Meredith said, we need to be ambassadors and advocates for the county. And I feel good that with all the folks that have stepped up to be involved in these different groups and commissions, that will have a greater impact. Goal forward, distinctive place. So placemaking, again, I know, Steve, I think you used the word nebulous. It means different things to different people, but, continuing to focus on placemaking with a variety of offerings to, all of our visitors and folks that work here and folks that live here. Programming events within the arts that highlight the characteristics and the advantages and the talent here in Arlington. And then continuing to invest. I think Arlington's done a great job. Things like bike lanes, jogging paths, pedestrian walkways. Obviously, right now they're a little bit more narrow than they have been. Parks, plazas, cultural entertainment venues, and community centers. And then for equitable and inclusive business environment, I think a lot of this really ties into things we've said. It's having a variety in the housing. It's having all different types of companies and attracting companies that aren't just hiring engineers that require graduate degrees. We want to have companies and attract companies that are tapping into a wide variety of skill sets that sets up a large county such as ours. Upward mobility, creating more training opportunities, and things like apprenticeships, internships, co-ops. Again, Steve Cooper has done a great job with that. I think that covers it for me.
So my name is Caitlin Anderson. You all get emails from me all the time. So I am staff at AED, and my title is the staff liaison to the EDC. So I am sort of the resident rule follower. I probably drive Nick crazy sometimes, but these are official advisory groups to the county board. And so I'm here to help with everything administrative and logistics wise to, make these meetings work and make it as easy as possible for you all to fulfill your mission. So I'm just going to quickly go through some slides around sort of the expectations of members of advisory groups in Arlington and some EDC things specifically. So there are over 50, I think, standing advisory groups that provide input to Arlington County Board on a variety of issues. So EDC is just one of those 50. Every single meeting of every advisory group is completely open to the public, meaning anyone can come in person or join online, because this is where you all are discussing business that you may be then making recommendations to the county board on. So the public is able to listen in on those conversations. So Arlington really relies on these commissions, on you all being out in the community and bringing those ideas back to them. So the members of the EDC are appointed officially by the county board. There's an application process. You all went through it. And our current board liaison to the EDC is JD Spain. So he will occasionally come to meetings. And I think Nick is meeting with him regularly and relaying some information. So AED, our department, we report to the county manager, and we have the formal liaison roles to both the EDC and also the Arts Commission. And the Arts Commission staff liaison is in our Cultural Affairs division. So as I said, resident rule follower, so legal requirements. So under FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, advisory group members are required to produce all information. That includes emails. If you are ever asked to do so around a particular topic. So again, this just goes to, this is a public body officially advising the county board. And so everything that you do within that official business can be open to the public. And these commissions must comply with the open meeting rules and regulations. So these rules do apply when 3 or more of the commissioners get together. And then these are just rules that we have to follow in terms of when we're publicly noticing these meetings, and we have to post all of the agendas and the materials. We have to post the minutes from the meetings. The public are able to come and photograph and record. And any voting that you do must be a public vote. You can't vote in secret or written ballots. So the main, the 3 parts that make this work are the county board, you all as the EDC, and then the staff liaison. This slide breaks down some of those different expectations. We will also be posting these slides for you all to reference, but really you all as the EDC are expected to provide direct recommendations and advice to the county board to bring matters to their attention that you think they should be thinking about related to policies or revising policies, and being ambassadors within the community, which Meredith has been talking about, to encourage understanding of what the community is feeling and seeing, and any pain points, and also understanding what AED is out there doing, and working cooperatively with staff. At the same time, the county board expectations are to be providing clear guidance to you all about what they want to be hearing about, considering your policies and your recommendations, and giving you regular feedback. They also play a role in actively recruiting and, of course, appointing the new members. And then staff liaison, as I said, I'm here to just provide logistics and admin support. If anyone ever has any questions, you can always come to me and I'll make sure to point you in the right direction. So specifics to EDC, just working within your all's mission, understanding what it means to be a policy advisor, of course, being civil, being collaborative, seeking understanding of the community's perspectives. And then one big thing is attendance, because these meetings need a quorum and able to actually take place, and for you all to be able to discuss these important topics and decide how you want to be advising the board. So we do have to have 51% of our membership to have a physical quorum in the room to have the meeting, whenever we're not doing all virtual meetings. And there's a lot of rules around virtual meetings that I won't get into right now, because we typically do these in person. And then attendance policy, this does come from the EDC charter. So we just ask that you all provide at least 48 hours notice if you are not going to be able to come to a meeting, or if you're going to be virtual for that meeting. That would be an excused absence. You've let us know in advance that you have a conflict. And from an attendance policy perspective, if there are more than 1 unexcused absence, so not letting us know, or 2 excused absences in a calendar year, that just may be a time where we would consider, is this commissioner able to fulfill these expectations or not? So anything, Meredith or Nick, that you all want to add around expectations?
I like just the robust way in which we are now prepared to go out and engage the community. And I think when I joined, it was underscored to me how helpful these discussions are and the ideas that we generate for the AED staff. To the extent, like Nick, if you see opportunity for us to be pulling more from the county board on specific economic development topics, or like if there's a push and pull there, I'm happy for us to, to support that as well. But it's, in times of, Charles and I were talking earlier, like in times of crisis come real opportunity. And so I think we're positioned to help sort of lean in on what those opportunities are and how to mitigate some of the macro and micro pressures that Kate and Caitlin have and that their team have so helpfully shared with us here. So really appreciate just the robust collaboration we've had with the AED as well.
Well, with respect to time, you all have seen these slides and several meetings, so I'm going to go through them super fast. But as you all know, our charge is really two buckets. We are focused on creating economic opportunity for all through job creation, but we're also responsible for helping to ensure a resilient economy through the lens of fiscal health. So our tax base is a huge part of what we focus on. This is an important, though, distinction as well, that we do economic development 3.0. Back in the day, all folks focused on in economic development was company attraction. What we do now is a holistic approach of complete community building. And so that's reflected by the diversity of our departments that I'll talk to in just a moment. Who we are, we've got our business investment team, which is all about company attraction. We have our Biz Launch team, which is all about the small business ecosystem in Arlington. We have cultural affairs, which has a lot to do with that complete community building of making this a great place with amenities and things to do. We have our real estate development group, which is the Marks Group, the strategic investment group, which is really focused on the built environment and that infrastructure that Nick was speaking to. And we also have a whole team dedicated to tourism promotion and marketing, because that's another big driver in our economy. We roughly are around 50 people at any given time, about a $10 million budget. That'll be a little lower this year, but nonetheless, that's who we are. And we don't do this alone. We partner very directly with our bids and our partnerships. There's 3 bids in the county, and there's 3 neighborhood partnerships, Langston Boulevard Alliance, Columbia Pike Partnership, and the Clarendon Alliance. And they are another part of the economic development ecosystem here in Arlington. Everyone is in this business. We've got the chamber, we've got our universities, we've got, as I mentioned, the bids and partnerships. So this is something that you all, as much as you can, kind of working and recognizing that if you're engaged with any of these other partners, you're doing the work of economic development. So keep that in the back of your mind. Real quick, what is our economy made up of? This is just a quick diagram of where we've been, which is we started as a suburb and we didn't have a lot of commercial development. We developed around our metro corridors, which is a story many of you know. And so we've become our own economic generator and hub in Northern Virginia. We have people that come to the county for employment, and we have a very big employment number. Our goal is to keep that going. But as you know, we're facing some challenges in what is that balance that we need to maintain in terms of residential to employment to really have a robust, fiscal base. But what we have evolved into is truly that corporate and tech destination. Our location next, where we are and the built environment we have still positions us in a good place for that. So our, though, economic well-being is also tied to the commercial real estate base. This is just an image showing where the dollars are coming from in terms of our tax revenue. And this is the problem that we've all been talking about quite a bit, which is that what we are seeing by 2024, and this would show another number by 2025, is that the commercial tax base has been in decline. That is primarily being driven by the office sector. So our charge in economic development is to pay attention to these numbers and continue to advise and do the work on behalf of the board to make sure we've got a resilient and robust strategy that the overall tax base does not go into decline. So what are our economic opportunities on the horizon? As we know, the vacancy rate has kind of dropped or at least held steady in 2025. We know that there's some growth potential in federal spending right now for technology and innovation around what we're calling national competitiveness and national security. Innovation will always be a focus here. We have a deep history in it, and we hope to maintain that moving forward. So how do we continue to build the tech ecosystem? But ultimately, quality of life and our local talent pool is one of the reasons companies do invest here as well. So we've got to keep paying attention to that. I still believe, and many do, I think that despite this moment we're in right now, that we are forever going to be a strong community based on the fact that we are an international capital city region. And that will always have an attractive value proposition in globally, quite frankly. And we are seeing that continued demand in the adaptive reuse. So these are our 5 goals. You've seen these before, but we're focused on business investment. We're focused on making sure our commercial areas are thriving. We're all in on tech jobs. And again, we're going to see more in that space. We want to continue to support our small business ecosystem and really make sure that that broader holistic community where arts, culture, and tourism are key drivers to our economy. So 2026 initiatives, again, for innovation and business growth. I'm not going to go through the list, but you guys have seen these before, but we are going to continue to push forward initiatives that both drive demand and reimagine our supply in terms of what is the place in the built environment that's most conducive to economic development. So with that, I'm not going to go into the detailed slides that are next because we run out of time, but they will be posted. But again, the AED team and department is, we report to the county manager reports to county board. So we are looking forward to continuing to partner with you because we're doing kind of the work behind the scenes to continue to support economic development initiatives, but we need your feedback and partnership to make sure we're always on the right course. So with that, I think we've.
Yeah, maybe just go to the very last slide, click through. There's a resources slide that just has contact information and links to specific things. So the handbook, the charter, the framework for prosperity that Nick just walked us through, our EDC website, which is public facing, always contains the meeting schedule and materials from previous meetings, and then contact info for your EDC leadership as well as Kate and I. So Nick.
Awesome. Thank you.
So are these things, when you say you're going to post them, where do you post them?
We will post them on that EDC public website where we always post final meeting materials and presentations. So
These slides?
yes.
Yeah.
We'll post them there later today or tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you all.